Dave Beatty, and for the last, say 2 decades or so, I've been a professional illustrator and graphic designer. And this is actually going to be my first tutorial that I'm posting online. I've had a lot of people ask questions about how I do certain things. I don't think I'm the world's greatest artist, but I have been doing it for a long time. And in the spirit of giving back and sharing some of what I've learned, I'm going to start posting tutorials every once in a while. And this is actually going to be the first one. Now, in this first one, what I'm going to talk about here, what I'm going to demonstrate if you're watching the video in real time, is actually how I do basically color renderings or marker renderings. This is basically a method I learned in college back in the early 1990s. What I'm using here is actually, I'm going to use in all of this is actually Prismacolor Markers. In this particular point right now in the video, I am actually using a 20% cool gray. The basic method that I was taught, that I've always used, is essentially just a version of sort of like, I guess, a down and dirty version of the old master's technique, where basically what you do is you go in and you render everything in grays and tones, kind of establish your lights, your darks, your values, leaving areas of the paper, the white of the paper open to basically serve as like a really intense, like bright highlight. So what I'm doing at the moment here is I'm actually focusing on rendering the face. I'm doing everything basically in 20% gray, and this is with the Prismacolor marker, again 20% cool gray. I'm making a lot of decisions while I'm doing this too. This is a sketch of, or actually penciled art for Blue Beetle. The classic, well in my mind anyway, the classic DC Comics character. This is the Ted Kord version, the version of Blue Beetle that I grew up with, based in the 1980s. My particular preferred or favorite version of the character, I guess this is kind of more well, when DC Comics acquired Charlton, all the Charlton characters are, if you're not familiar with that, are characters like Captain Atom, Blue Beetle, as well as characters like Judo Master and The Question, Sarge Steel. All these were Charlton Comics characters. They were a competitor and another comic book publisher that used to compete against Marvel and DC way back when. This particular version of the Blue Beetle is the original, like I said, the original Ted Kord version. There was actually a fairly good comic book run that I really quite enjoyed, that came out when DC acquired these characters. They did a big, huge launch for them, with posters and all kinds of fun stuff to celebrate the launch of this particular series. And at the same time, they also launched a question series and Captain Atom, and they took some of the kind of lesser known characters and kind of sprinkled them in different titles like Suicide Squad and stuff like that. These are the Charlton characters are ones that I've just always really kind of loved and had an affinity for. Maybe because they're not exactly like all of the other Marvel and the DC characters. So again, what I'm doing here is I'm rendering at 20% gray. What I'm doing, the kind of decisions I'm making, just so you understand the thought process of what is happening. What I'm thinking through is the actual forms themselves. Most of them are kind of rounded forms, or kind of more spherical type forms. So I'm thinking about where the light is falling, leaving the paper exposed, or the white of the paper showing, and then I'm going into the other areas and actually going in and kind of filling that in with the 20% gray. There will be some a little bit of rim lighting in this piece by the time we get to the end of it, but at this stage, all I'm trying to do is just kind of think through my choices, how the muscle forms are, and kind of how to kind of approach rendering out these forms. If you hear any weird noise in the background, it's just because I'm recording this in the studio. I've got a fan going. I live in Arizona. We're in the midst of our monsoon season, so it is very kind of humid, at least humid for us here. and it gets quite uncomfortable in the studio, especially in the middle of the day, which is when I'm actually recording this. This is on a Saturday, so if you hear any kind of weird sounds, it's probably the fan in the background. But I have to have that fan on, or it just gets so hot in here. It's unbearable to work in here. I shot this with, for those people that are interested, I shot this video actually on a tripod mount and used basically my Galaxy, I think it's Galaxy S8, 9, I don't remember, cell phone. The voiceover and everything I'm doing is actually using other stuff. I actually brought the raw video in and kind of hacked it apart into the pieces that I needed, and I tried to film each distinct segment so that it would hopefully be hopefully easier to kind of follow along. I'm not the world's fastest artist, and to be honest with you, everything I do is pretty much a labor of love. So, I can do things really quick when I'm under the gun. This particular piece, since I'm trying to demonstrate something, I'm trying to be very careful with the choices I make. As the video goes on, you're going to see things do not go as planned, and I'm having to kind of do workarounds for certain things. That seems to be pretty common in the arts, just in general. You try to plan, you try to have it kind of everything figured out, and then in the midst of creating something, things happen. Sometimes happy accidents, sometimes unhappy accidents, and the trick with it usually is just kind of, curse under your breath or whatever you need to do, and just go, okay, all right, we're just going to keep on going and keep on soldiering on. I've had highs in my careers and lows in my career over the last couple decades. The trick with it is, to be in all honesty, is just if you want to be a creative professional, if you want to create art, specifically like we're talking about, comic books and comic book characters and that kind of stuff, the industry can be kind of tough to break into. Maintaining and keeping your place in the industry is almost as difficult, I think, as actually breaking in. It seems like with the advent of the computer and technology that the world is moving faster and faster and faster, and the only way to really keep up is to just keep at it, and to keep trying to learn and grow. I've been going through very much a heavy animation influence stage, so all of my work is looking much more like an animated cartoon, like the kind of things I grew up watching when I was a kid, and it's just the stuff that I love. So kind of unapologetically just moving that direction and letting things be, what they're going to be. So what's happening now, if you're still watching the video, and I haven't bored you to tears, what I'm doing now is I've actually switched from the 20% gray Prismacolor marker to actually using a 40% gray. And I'm going in and I'm kind of beefing up the shadows. What you want to do is leave kind of the lighter part of the gray kind of exposed, or kind of towards closer to the light. So what I'm doing now with the darker gray is all I'm doing is going in and kind of hitting kind of if you're familiar with cell shading with animation kind of a style, I'm just kind of giving it like not really a second coat, more than just coloring a portion of it and then leaving part of the 20% gray showing. So I'm kind of modeling or rendering the values or the tones, kind of intensifying the shadows in this particular stage. I'm also probably going through too and kind of changing my mind on certain things and just deciding, we're just going to go ahead and make this 40% gray, or we're going to go ahead and do this, or we're going to go ahead and do that. I do that a lot when I work. This is the same basic method I use when I'm doing sketch cards. I've done a lot of sketch card gigs over the years. Not as much as some, but more so than others. And I started doing sketch card gigs, to be honest, one is a creative exercise. I thought it was interesting and challenging to try to produce so many little pieces of art in such a tight kind of time frame. I've never been a big 24-hour comic book challenge kind of guy, because I've been on projects where you had to turn pages around, like, overnight and stuff, and that's not very fun for me. I am probably going to be doing one here in a little while that I got talked into, which I'm happy to do. It's going to be like a bit of a fundraiser for a library, which is fine, but typically I'm not a big fan of just trying to hack stuff out as fast as you possibly can. It's a good skill to have, but I feel like that sometimes if you overindulge in that too much, your work suffers. But as a creative exercise, and as making interesting choices and stuff, it can be kind of fun. And I thought it'd be kind of cool because at the time I was doing a lot of sketch card gigs. Like I was working on Cryptozoic's New 52 for the DC comic book series, the New 52 series that Cryptozoic was doing at the time. And I thought it was kind of fun because I was an actual artist working on New 52 titles for DC Comics at the same time I was working on the sketch card set. And I thought, well, this is kind of fun. If you pull a card for me, it's like I'm actually working on the New 52, on some of these characters. And I thought that might be kind of fun for fans and collectors and whatever. So that was kind of part of my thought process when behind why I took the assignment. I don't think I learned anything terribly new during that period. Pretty much, it was just kind of, I guess, kind of doing it. I guess the thing is, I just kind of, the big thing that everyone needs to know is sometimes you just got to get on with it. Just get over, things look the way they look, and you do the best you can, and hopefully in time you improve and improve and improve. Hopefully people like the work that you're doing, but you can't really I don't know, beat yourself up when things don't look perfect. So at this stage, I think all I was doing right then is I think what I'm doing is I'm taking I don't remember what marker I'm using right there. I'm not using a blender though. I never ever use a blender. I think what I might be doing at this stage is trying to see. I've got a small video playing back while I actually talk through what we're looking at here. I think I was taking the 20% and going back over certain. Yes, I'm taking the 20% and I'm going over certain areas. And what that does, because these are alcohol-based markers, is it kind of reactivates the marker on the paper. So what I'm actually doing is by using the 20% and going over it, it's actually causing the 40% and the 20% to actually blend together a little bit more. And I'm also realizing that I probably did not give myself enough 20%. Generally anyway, I left too much of the white of the paper showing. So what I'm also doing too is I am actually kind of putting more of the 20% gray down and kind of taking some of the white out, trying to give it a little bit more of a modeled, rendered kind of look in terms of like the tones and the shapes. So let's see here. I'm going to zoom back in so I can see. What I'm doing now I've got a 60% gray. These are all cool gray. I've got a 60% gray marker, and now I'm going in and hitting the darkest parts or the darkest areas kind of the shadows. Again, the theory being is the 20, the 40, and now the 60. What you're trying to do is create a gradation of color. So you're going from lightest to dark. So now I'm going in with the darkest gray marker I'm going to be using on this, and I am actually kind of beefing up the core shadows as I'm going in and doing the renders. and I'm kind of switching between tools. My original thought was I'm gonna do. I'm pretty sure my original thought was I'm gonna do it all with the small tip, but I sometimes get frustrated using the small tip because it never really puts down enough pigment of the marker or whatever, and I feel like it just takes too long. I think that's one of my main things is that even though I do not consider myself particularly fast, as I get older, I really don't like spending too much time on any given assignment. A big concept when you're working as a commercial artist is the concept of finished, not perfect, and a lot of my work kind of falls within that category. Just because in the past when I was younger, I would work on something and just work it to death, and it just it's never really a good method. At least if you're because if you're working in the commercial arts field, unless you're working on an hourly day job type position, which I've done that too, and and no illusions, I'm currently working at a place where I've got a day job, and I've just basically I was faced with some choices and some challenges a few years ago, and I was basically left with the idea of oops, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. I was basically left with the choice of how do I want to move forward with my career. What do I want to do? I was not really. I'd spent the last several years mostly as an inker, and I've done everything at one stage. I've been a penciler, I've been an inker, I've been a colorist. I've lettered. Most of my lettering has been on indie books. The majority of my coloring has been on indie and small. Well, I can't say that because I've colored some covers for DC. But anyhow, the point being is the majority of well, that's not really true either. At one stage or another, I've done a lot of stuff. Anyhow, I guess the best way to describe it is this way. At the stage in which I was forced with some difficult choices, it was either double down and try to do creator-owned work and come back to that and be in a position to make some, I guess, be able to make the decisions on a project versus basically trying to pick up work and just hope that things were going to work out. And to make a long story short, the more I thought about things, I just realized that I really want to be in a position to have a little bit more control over my career. And whether right or wrong, time will tell. But I basically made the decision to focus on creator-owned work. And so I went back into the workforce and just got an hourly day job because I'm not independently wealthy enough that I can just get away with not having, I'm not in a position where I can't go without, regular, I guess, without money coming in. So I don't know how else to describe it. Most people who are living paycheck to paycheck and you all understand what I'm talking about. Anyhow, I'm basically in the same boat. So I was at one point a little bit more kind of set up, but I went after Scott Clark, who was an artist I worked with at the time. I guess I was primarily an inker at that period. Scott Clark had died, and I found myself in a position of trying to find work with other people, and I just was not having a lot of success or really able to get the kind of opportunities, the kind of work that I really wanted to do. And so I was kind of forced with a choice, and I said, well, you know what, if these are my options, I would just assume, how do I put this, be in a position to call the shots on whatever I did moving forward. And at one point I was still kind of looking for work, and then I was like, I'm just gonna get a day job, and I'm gonna just figure this out because I can't deal with this, and I exhausted the money I had on hand, waiting for an assignment that never materialized, and it's just you gotta kind of balance that when you're a freelancer. because I freelance and I've done the day job and I've kind of done it all, and I just made the decision, you know what, I'm just gonna make the plunge and try to do creator own work, and come what may, I'm just gonna stick with that. So what I'm doing right here is the same thing as I was doing before. This is probably a little bit easier to see. What I'm doing now is I'm going in with the 20% cool gray again, and I'm going over the 40 and the 60% gray. And what I'm doing is, because it's alcohol based, it's reactivating the pigment, and I'm actually blending it with the 20%. And then I'm also going in and still changing my mind about how much of the white of the paper should be showing through. Now, one thing I might ought to mention is that okay, well here I'm coloring. Let me talk about the coloring for a minute, and then I'll go back in and mention what I was about to mention. So at this stage, what I'm doing is I've got, I think it's a beige. It's a beige marker. I should just go grab one. Okay, you're about to hear a sound because I'm going to get up and walk across the room and grab something and come right back. So bear with me. Okay, so I'm back here. All right, so what I'm doing right here is I have got turn the light on here so it'll be easier for me to see. I'm here in the studio. So what I was just doing is I was taking a brick beige. Again, these are also Prismacolor markers. I took a brick beige and I went in and basically filled the majority of the area, except leaving really kind of high points for highlights. There is still some of the white of the paper showing through, and I went in and I colored that over with the brick beige. And now what I'm doing is I'm actually using a sand or sable, and now what I'm going back in is, again, it's a sand or sable colored marker, and what I'm doing now is I'm going in and I'm kind of going over the shadow areas, and also into the grays, and kind of blending, again, creating a gradation of color. And now what I'm doing is I'm going back to the brick beige, and now I'm actually using another one that's a little bit dried out, but going back over and kind of, again, forcing the alcohol to reactivate and blend and kind of run the colors together a little bit more to create more of a gradation. So at this point I'm using a yellow, because Blue Beetle has these little yellow goggle things, so I'm going in with a yellow right here, and kind of coloring that in. It's kind of like a yellow goggle kind of a thing. Same thing, leaving certain white areas for highlights, and then filling the rest of it in. Now, something with this art is that this art is not already inked. This is penciled. I'm doing all the basically the color work and everything, and kind of getting it all together, and then what I'm doing is I'm going to go back in afterwards and actually ink it, and inking it will actually be the not quite the final stage, but next to last final stage. So I've just finished using the yellow, and now I'm going in with I don't remember what that is. Let me go grab it. It's kind of I don't think it's goldenrod, it's something else. Okay, so what I was using right there is actually a Spanish orange, but you could also use like a goldenrod. The goal is when you're trying to create like with these Prismacolor markers, you're trying to create a golden color. The trick is not to, at least in my mind anyway, for my personal taste, the trick is to not use like an orange. even though the temptation might be to use an orange. So you want to use something that is orange but has a little bit more character to it in terms of, I guess, the color that it produces. So that was actually a Spanish orange, and it creates kind of a nice golden kind of effect or look. So now what I'm doing is I'm going in. This is a, let's see here. Sorry, I keep bumping the microphone. True blue. So I've got a true blue right now. And you can see too what I'm doing is I'm going in because I left a lot of white. And the reason I left a lot of white when I was doing the grays is because that's for the pure tones of the color, or the value that the color actually makes, for it to kind of show through. And so what I'm doing here, and these are, all of my markers are pretty heavily used. So if you have a brand new marker and you're going in and doing something like this, you're going to want to test it before you actually put it on the piece, so you have a sense of how much pigment or marker or whatever it is going to go down. And so it's the same thing. If you see the way I'm kind of working here, is I'm just kind of letting the because the blue is actually also helping, because it's alcohol based, to reactivate the grays that are underneath. And you can see how now it's starting to look kind of mottled, like in terms of color, and it's actually starting to look a little bit more three-dimensional. And again, like I said, this is not inked. That actually comes later. And again, like I said, most of these shapes are kind of spherical. Like if you've ever taken an art class, or if you've ever looked at a book where they talk about rendering things, it's kind of all rendered kind of like a sphere. Even though they're different kind of oblong shapes, they're kind of treated kind of as spheres. Now there's like a two-tone blue color scheme that the Tegcord Blue Beetle has. So this is kind of the darker areas of the blue, and then we'll go back in and we'll be doing the lighter areas of the blue here in a minute. This tutorial is probably going to run probably about an hour or so long, and I'm just trying to talk through it while we sit here and we do this in real time. I felt like it's these tutorials, and instead of me speeding through it, I thought it would be helpful if it was actually in real time, so you get a sense for how long this actually takes. Now, when I'm doing sketch cards, I'm a little bit more quick with how I handle those. Just the nature of the assignment requires that you move quickly. So that's typically what happens on those kind of assignments. For this particular piece, like I said before, because it's going to be kind of a showcase piece for the tutorial, I am probably taking a little bit more care and a little bit more time than I normally would. And again, it's heavily stylized. Like I said, I'm going through a very heavy animation influence phase right now. So it is very, very animation influenced. Again, leaving areas of white for the highlight, and then going in and coloring over the gray marker, again kind of reactivating it and continuing to blend the grays and the marker together to create tones and values with the color. Again, very much, like I said, kind of like the old masters kind of method. Now here's where I goofed up. I was so concerned about what I was doing, I wasn't paying attention, and I literally just colored his lower leg way too high in that blue. And I'm so concerned about trying to do a good job for the tutorial, I honestly didn't even catch it. And then when I did actually notice it, I was like, oh well. And then I try to basically kind of save it here later on in the tutorial. Mistakes happens, folks, despite the best intentions. Now, for some people, this might be a fun way to actually do a color rough for a painting, for example. I like to paint. I really do not have much time to paint currently, but I do love to paint. And when I do paint, I actually use this marker method to actually sometimes develop color roughs that I use for color guides for myself before I actually do a painting. So what I've got now is I've got a light cerulean blue. It's very, very, all my light cerulean blues are very, very burned out, which basically means the alcohol is almost evaporated. Um, but there's just enough in it to put the pigment down and actually blend it and kind of reactivate the gray tones that are underneath. So I'm just going in right now and basically doing the lighter areas, the light blue areas of the costume. Again, leaving some of the white of the paper showing through. Again, following the forms, like I said, they're kind of like spheres. I'm just going through kind of quick, and if you see me kind of burnishing down or kind of whatever with this marker, is because it is almost basically burnt out. I usually do not throw things away until they absolutely have to be thrown away, and you can actually, with these Prismacolor markers, get the correct kind of alcohol, and you can actually use an eyedropper and refill them to basically kind of reactivate them. At the same point too, because this is a lighter blue color, I'm just kind of going with it and kind of letting the gray kind of show through in certain areas, and it just creates kind of a fun kind of a look. And again, like I said, I do a lot of sketch card gigs, and here I'm trying to cover over this area, and I'm like, if I just burnish it down enough, by the time I ink it, I don't know if anyone's gonna be able to tell. So now I'm kind of doing this area of the leg kind of darker and darker, basically trying to render it out where by the time that it's inked, you won't really be able to tell too much. I mean, you can tell, but you won't be able to tell. So now what I'm doing is I'm taking the light cerulean blue again, and I'm actually going into some of these shadow areas. And sometimes what this does, not always, but it can help give it a little bit more of a more sophisticated look to the shadows when you do that. Sometimes not necessary. I usually do it anyway, and then I kind of make the assessment. It's like, oh, it's kind of good. So if it looks good, I won't ink over that particular area, and if I don't like it, I'll go ahead and ink right into it. So now I'm actually going in to ink it. When I do my comic book work, I actually am more of a brush inker than a pen inker. Croquills kind of frustrate me, I guess because I learned to be a brush inker. But many, many, many moons ago, I was involved in an automobile accident, and I lost a lot of stabilizer muscles and finite control because of the automobile accident, and so I've had to kind of make adjustments. So I will get the brushes out and all the nice inks and go to town on a piece every once in a while, but it's painful for me to do that sometimes, so I do not do it as much as I once did. And I find that with pieces like this, sometimes it's better just to go in with some, microns or whatever, and just kind of hit it kind of hard and let it be. So that's kind of what I'm doing here, is I'm inking with a micron. This is an 03. You could probably see that from the tutorial. I do sometimes use the 01s and the 005s, but as I'm getting older, I find that I don't have a lot of patience because it takes too long to build the ink work up with those for the look and the style that I'm trying to do. So I just don't have a lot of patience for them anymore. So I've started using just the larger ones, and I just do what I got to do, and I get in and I get out. So again, my pencils were already there, so I'm just finding just the deep shadow areas that would be black, or the areas that I believe should be black, and then I'm going in and blacking those in with the 03. So the face and the goggles are kind of done. So now I'm going over and I'm going to start filling in. He's got these shapes on his mask and his costume. They're kind of like insects, heavy, bold, stripe kind of shapes on his costume, and I'm going in and doing those. I think I've actually switched to an 08 at this point. Yeah, I think it's an 08. So I'm just kind of going in and filling these shapes out and inking it. I tend to like kind of a heavy hold line on my characters, so typically the way I do that now is, like, for example, if I'm doing a background, if I'm using like a repeatograph or a microns or whatever, and I'm doing a piece, I will ink the background with the main hold line, which the hold line, for some people don't know, hold line typically means hold or color hold. That's what line art used to be called like a billion years ago. And basically, my hold line is my outside line around my figure and my character. And I like to have a really thick hold line or contour line or whatever you want to call it, that kind of outlines my figure. And then when I'm inking my interiors, like my environmental stuff or like my backgrounds and stuff that my character is standing in front of or not interacting with, but standing in front of, what I'll actually do is I'll actually use the thinner microns for the hold line for that, so it creates a natural separation. The thicker line is going to come back and the thinner line is going to recede into the background. In a weird way, by the choices that you make with your inking tools and stuff, you actually help to create the illusion of an atmospheric kind of perspective, sort of, because if it's thinner, it just doesn't come as forward. So again, I'm just going into inking at this point. It's pretty rudimentary. I'm following my pencils are really tight for this particular piece, so there's not a lot of guesswork into what I'm doing right here. I know exactly what I'm trying to hit in terms of my line art, and the only decisions I'm still making a lot of decisions, but I guess the big thing that's happening right here is I'm trying to make a determination of how much to let the color do the work, and then how much do I need to go in and kind of create shadows. So typically areas where I feel like that the markers are not getting it done in terms of creating the look of the kind of tone or the value I want to have, I'm going in and having the micron do that now. And then there's other areas where I'm going, oh, this looks really good like this, so I'm not gonna do this heavy-handed shadow I had originally thought or planned. Now this sketch of Blue Beetle, this is a tightened up pencil version of a loose sketch I did really late at night. I do these super quick late at night sketches that I post on Instagram and also on my Twitter. So if you would like to see the original sketch, if you haven't, for this particular piece, you can find it on Instagram and also on my Twitter. Yeah, and I went back in. I'm on a light box at the moment. Typically the way I work is at a light box. I'm going to do a tutorial later and talk about the value of a light box and kind of show everyone the way that I was taught to use a light box back in the day. I'm just getting kind of quiet because I'm just inking. There's not much else to say here other than just, like I said, making a lot of kind of small decisions, but mostly just following the penciled line art that I had done before. I have really no intention. I guess if people ask for it, I have kind of a simplified cartoony anatomy that I use, and I kind of like it. I spent a lot of years kind of developing this kind of style and this kind of look, and I really like it. I don't know how commercially viable this kind of a look is anymore. It seems like people want, really super scratchy, super heavy, realistic, whatever. And I like my stuff to be a little bit more fantastical and a little bit more open and kind of inviting. And that might just be just my taste and where I am at this stage in my life. So I am in some areas doing kind of some real quick kind of like rendering, just some real quick kind of hatch lines kind of here and there, and like I said, I'll do a video later on, another tutorial, and I'll actually walk through my thought process and how I determine some of what I do. I'm very much a self-taught artist when it comes to comics and an illustration. I left college kind of over a dispute and basically just went into the workforce and tried to find people who were really good at what I wanted to learn, and then work with them on projects and learn from them. Um, and in some ways, I think that's helped me, and in some ways, it's probably hurt me, because maybe I don't have the foundational training when it comes to certain aspects I probably should have. But um, as with all things in my personal life and the choices I've had to make, um, I find myself at stages where I just have to make a decision and roll with it. It's never the ideal situation. It's always, well, what can I do with the circumstance I'm in at the moment? How can I make the best of what's going on? And that's usually how my decisions are made. And I'll be honest with you, it's served me well in my career, and it's shot me in the foot. And I don't know which is better. I've had friends who've gone to college and got their degrees and everything, and then turn around and they can't really, they're still underemployed for their skill level and their knowledge level and what they know how to do. And then there's a percentage of us like myself that um, picked up a bunch of books and bought the old VHS how-to things and whatever, and went and kind of ghosted or apprenticed with more experienced artists, and kind of asked our questions and explained what it was that we wanted to do, and able to work really hard and turn that into a career. But every person has to find their own way. That's just the way that worked for me. And like I said, jury's still out. When my time comes and I punch the ticket, and I guess kind of how I'm remembered after I'm gone, maybe that's how the decision about if what I did was right or wrong, people will be able to make a hard judgment call on that. David did it the right way, or David did it the wrong way. Seems like that's how life typically works. Do a lot of old school kind of touches on stuff and whatever often, and that's kind of what I'm doing here. This is very much an old school kind of approach. I think at some point I kind of go, that's not working, and then I kind of just fill it in or something. I don't remember. I shot this a little while ago from when I'm recording the audio for it. Yeah, see, that's what I was saying. I kind of looked at it, I was like, that's not working, and so I'm putting in more hatch lines and filling it in more, and kind of changing it on the fly, because what I thought would work is not really working. Typically what you do is you want to use dark areas. Dark areas are going to kind of recede, and your light areas are going to come forward. So when you're thinking through your value decisions, especially when you're inking and stuff, that's how you want to think. I think I might have said that earlier when we were doing the grays, but it's all the same stuff. Just kind of going in again and just again inking based off of how I feel the tones and the values that I created with the markers are working versus what my original penciled intentions were. And again, like I said, I like a really thick exterior hold line. So now I'm going in. This is another old school with a rib cage. It's kind of like turned away from the light, kind of doing that line render kind of thing. That's kind of a real old school kind of a thing. I'm a big fan of a lot of the classic and the old school artists, and I have a lot of that kind of influence on my work. And that's another thing where it's like, time will tell if just, not being afraid to embrace my love of classic comics and cartooning in terms of style and approach, if that was good for my career or bad for my career. But only after I'm gone will anyone really know. I'll never know the answer to that question. People who come later will be able to judge, again, like I said, whether I did it right or I did it wrong. So what I've done now, I've got one of those um, pit pen. Looks like a brush tip on it, and I'm just going in and filling in the large areas of black. I hadn't finished doing all the kind of detail stuff with the micron yet, but I was kind of struggling with how it was looking, and I was trying to decide. It's like, okay, is this working? Is this not working? And so I decided to go ahead and fill in some of these large areas of black, and then I could better see if I needed to go back in and rethink some of my inking decisions. Sometimes you got to do that. You got to kind of skip around what you're trying to kind of achieve. And, certain traditional mediums are more forgiving than others. Some you can do this kind of skip around, and you're not going to pay a price. But you have to really kind of know your medium, because other traditional mediums you do that with, and you'll ruin a piece. So you do have to work enough with the materials to know kind of where you can kind of skip around, and it'll be kind of forgiving or not forgiving. So yeah, I've gone back to the micron here, and I'm going back in and bouncing back and forth between rendering out and shadow areas and detail lines, and coming back in and looking at the hold lines, and I'm kind of leaving where the hold line goes kind of behind his head. That's another kind of old school cartooning kind of thing. I've decided not to draw that line all the way. I'm leaving it where the line would go behind his head. I'm actually just leaving it, kind of getting short and leaving it there. And part of the philosophy and the theory behind that, with that broken line, is it helps to create the illusion that something is in front and something is in back. So I really need to get a new chair. That was my chair creaking. Again, some of that more of that old school. They used to do all these little pole render lines, like around like the ankles and the wrists and stuff, and I've always thought it was kind of cool. And no one really does it anymore, but I kind of like it, so I'm going back in and doing some of that and infusing my work with it kind of here and there on a piece where it makes sense. Like a piece like this, I feel like it kind of makes sense. And then, like I said, you can see in this what I'm doing here in places. I'm going, okay, well that didn't work, and just filling it in black, and in other areas I'm letting the values and the tones that I was able to create and get from the markers, I'm letting those kind of do the work in some of those places. Again, he's got these kind of thick, like stripe kind of things in his costume. Again, you can kind of see what I'm doing here in terms of pulling the shadows and the forms. A little bit of kind of render, some little render hatch line kind of stuff going on in there. It's just real quick kind of stuff. I used to be much more elaborate with how I handled these kind of things, and I guess I find that when I do that kind of stuff now, that if I try to create too much of a value or a tonal range with when I'm doing hatch lines and stuff, that I tend to overdo it, and it's too much, and it doesn't communicate what I need it to communicate, and it just looks really heavy-handed and kind of strange. And with the computer coloring and coloring in general, especially computer coloring being where it is now, at least for comics and certain kinds of illustration, you can do so much amazing work now with computer colors. I really honestly feel like that it might be better to let the colorist or let your color work kind of stand on its own, and allow it to kind of inhabit a lot of the values in terms of like tones and stuff when you're doing color work, specifically where it's going to be printed. Now, this is an original traditional piece. This is not going to be used for publication or anything. You could scan this in the computer, and depending upon how you adjust the levels or whatever, you could pull the values kind of up or down within the different, tonal spaces or whatever, and actually use this kind of style or method to actually color an illustration, and then kind of buffer it with some kind of computer, I guess we'll call it augmentation, to kind of finish out the piece and have it be nice enough that it could stand kind of on its own without necessarily coloring it in the computer. You could use this method. I mean, you go back far enough in time, and there were some comic books that were colored this very method that I'm using right now. Not too terribly different. I think the big difference would be I'm going to come in with a Prismacolor white color pencil and do my kind of rim light, and kind of bolster my highlight areas. And in the old days, that might have been done with like an airbrush or something. And like I said, if you want to work that way, this method still works. It's just very, I guess, very time consuming, and the results are a little bit more haphazard than if you color in the computer. That's why the computer coloring has become such a standard, because it does such a good job of what you need it to do. Getting more of that kind of old school kind of rendering. You used to do that kind of stuff on kneecaps and stuff too. It's just you get just a much more consistent, predictable result with computer coloring. My computer coloring, especially now, is very simplistic. If I'm going to take on a project, I have to be able to get the project out pretty quick. I still want it to look nice, so I try to be more selective about my color choices, and not spend as much time rendering kind of things. I'm always trying to pare things down so that I can get more done with less time. And like I said, I don't know if that's a byproduct of just getting older, and you realize it's like I'm not getting enough done. I need to get more done. I need to get more done. I need to get more done. Or if it's just my own particular, I guess, where I am personally, in terms of what I want to accomplish and what I want to get done. I don't know. Yeah, and we're just, watching me ink here. Hope you're enjoying this. I kind of hesitated about starting to do some of this stuff, but I've had so many people ask me, and I'm like, okay, I'll put something on. So I hope it's helpful. I hope people get value out of it, and they find it useful. You can create some really nice commission pieces for people using this method, and it has kind of a nice comic book, created kind of a finish to it, and it looks really, really nice. So yeah, there you go. I think we're getting here towards the end. I'm going to be grabbing that white Prismacolor pencil here at some stage, and then coming back in. Okay, I've decided to fill some more areas with black. A lot of on-the-fly decision-making going on in this kind of stuff. A lot of on-the-fly decision-making. And I would imagine I'm sitting back going, okay, am I ready? Am I ready to do or do I need to go back in? Okay, here we go. All right. So what I'm doing now is I've got a white Prismacolor color pencil, and I am basically just going in and I am beefing up some of the highlight areas, kind of coloring out from the white of the paper. And then you'll also see I'm going into certain areas and kind of basically drawing out a very subtle rim light in certain areas, just a little bit of rim light, just to try and make the forms feel a little bit more rounded. And yeah, I'm just going to go through here real quick with the white Prismacolor, just kind of going through and hitting these different areas and kind of pulling it together Like there's a little REM light, little REM light. Sometimes it like when you see the original piece, it makes it look really nice, but when you're looking at it like this, like in a video with the lighting conditions I had, this is before I bought a better lighting kit. There's a little bit more REM light, or reflective light, I guess you might want to call it. Well, REM light. That's highlight. Okay, that's beefing up the highlight, beefing up the highlight, beefing up the highlight. Again, coloring out from the white of the paper, beefing up the highlight, beefing up the highlight, beefing up the highlight. Same thing. And I like for it to look like it's done by hand, so I will often leave it a little rough in some places, because I like people to be able to look at it like, hey, somebody should do this, this is cool. Where like you initially see it and you go, oh man, that's really cool, and you get right up on it, it's like, man, somebody did this by hand. I kind of like that kind of thing. And again, I'm not the world's greatest artist. I mean, I'm very proud of the work that I do, and I'm glad when I can help other people kind of, there's a REM light, where I can help other people kind of advance and learn better tools and techniques to help them advance their career. Now the bandage you see I'm wearing, I actually sliced my finger open through the fingernail, cutting apart some oh, here I go, I'm signing it. We're right here at the end. I'll save you my horrible cutting story. So there we go, everybody. So yeah, so that's the end. You sign it at the end. So there we go. We are out. Hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching. Please share, like, and subscribe.